So in the last lesson, we looked at how to call essentially query methods against smart contracts where we check balances and so on and so forth, things that don't change the actual state of the smart contract. And therefore, we don't actually have to sign any transactions or anything like that. We can just run simple queries. And we also acquired some tokens that we're going to use in this lesson. So in this lesson, what we're actually going to do is we're going to submit some transactions via functions in a smart contract, and we're just going to do something simple and transfer tokens from one of our accounts to the other. But you'll be able to use this same exact methodology for any other function that you want to call. Okay, so as we'll remember, our account 2 has 3 RAIN tokens and our account 1 has 2. So I'm just going to transfer 1 token from account to account 2. So we should end up with a balance of account having 1 and account 2 having 4, if we all remember our elementary math. So I'm going to do xfer amount equals web3.utils.tway 1, and then we'll say ether. And so this is a little bit of a weird thing about Ethereum, in my opinion, or Web3, however you want to look at that, is that we're saying we want to say 1 ether, but what we're really doing is we're saying 1 times 10 to the 18 decimal places, because that's sort of the standard amount of decimal places that tokens have, and that's the number of decimal places that Ethereum has. So when we say 1 ether, it doesn't mean we're going to transfer an ether. It says 1 times 10 to the 18, basically. Okay, so now we have our xfer amount. The next thing we need to do is get our transfer function out of the RAIN contract. So the difference between what we're doing now and what we did in one of the earlier lessons where we just did a basic transfer is we have to provide more information to the transaction. Because if you just send somebody else ether, that's kind of the default behavior of the blockchain, sort of. It's like, it's the most basic kind of thing you can do. This is more complicated, so we have to give information like which contract we're talking to, what function we want to run, what are the arguments, and then we have to sign that transaction and then submit that transaction. So it's still a 3-step process, but you have to do a little more preparation of the transaction. So what we'll do is we'll say transfer function equals RAIN contract dot methods dot transfer, and then we'll say we want to send it to account 2, right? So the transfer function takes 2 arguments, an address to send to and then an amount. So then we want to say our xfer amount. Okay, and now if we look at the transfer function, this is interesting because basically what we've done is we've just stored a reference to the function preloaded with these particular arguments. You can see here we have this send function on here. We also have estimate gas and encode ABI. So for our purposes, what we actually need to do is get the encode ABI. So I'm going to say var encoded data equals transfer function dot encode ABI. Let's take a look at this. Encoded data. So this won't be anything we can recognize, but basically what it is all the information about the function we want to execute encoded in such a way that we can submit it and the blockchain will understand it. Now we can actually go through the same process we went through earlier in one of the previous lessons. So we can say var tx equals from, we want to send this from account to account 2, right? Yes, we're transferring to account 2. So from account.address to RAIN contract.address. So we're not sending, because we're sending ERC20 tokens, we're not sending anything directly to account 2. We're sending the transaction to the actual RAIN contract because it is actually what keeps track of the balances of the various parties. So we'll say gas 2 million again, and then I'm going to say data encoded data. Okay, and close off my bracket. And now let's take a look at this TX and just make sure it looks like what we expect. Okay, nothing looks crazy. Finally, we need to sign it. So that was the first step, generate the transaction. It was a little more complicated than before because we had to actually set up the whole function and encoded data and stuff. But essentially, still a 3-step process. Generate a transaction, sign a transaction, execute a transaction. So now we need to sign it. So we'll say signed TX, and then we'll say web3.eth.accounts. I think it's signed transaction. We'll give it TX, and then we'll say account.private key. And then we need to do our then stuff to handle the result. So we'll just say signed TX equals result. And close everything off. And now I should be able to look at signed TX. And you can see here we have the same kind of thing we had earlier with a raw transaction, which we're going to make use of. So the final step is to do exactly like earlier. Say web3 ETH send signed transaction. Signed TX dot raw transaction dot then receipt, and we'll just console.log the receipt. Dot catch error console dot error. We'll see what happens. So we'll have to wait, and this will take a minute, and then we'll see what happens. So you can see that after probably a little over a minute, I got back my receipt of the successful transaction. So let's just do a quick check. Where did I, ERC20 balance. So we'll just check the account. So I only have 1, and then account 2 has 4. Okay, so exactly what we expected. Alright, so that's it for this video tutorial. If you go through the written tutorial, don't be freaked out if some of the information is a little bit different. I think we set it up in different times in slightly different ways, but it's all essentially the same thing. The other thing too is you'll notice that throughout these written tutorials, we do throw in some sort of helpful utility functions, like there's an ERC20 xver function, which is kind of cool. So take a look at that stuff if you're interested, and then there's going to be an other considerations or additional information thing at the end with some helpful stuff if you want to look at that. So anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.